Historic Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. My name is Andrew Medina. I am member number 1212, and I'm so glad to be your host for the evening. We got another great program coming at you tonight. I'm joined by the one and only Matthew Allison to talk about his adventures in Afghanistan. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Well, Matthew, welcome to the Adventurers Club, and congratulations on your recent induction.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's fantastic to have you as a member, and
Thank you.
hope we could get to hear more from you more and about your adventures. So, Afghanistan, this is not your first rodeo, is it? You've been a few times at this point, right?
Yeah, this was my third, the talk that I'm going to give tonight was my third trip to Afghanistan.
So this is number 3. When were the first two?
First trip was a 10-year anniversary of 9/11, so it was 2011.
And when were you there? Like what time of year? Like on the anniversary?
I was there on the anniversary. I departed on the anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so when was the second one?
Second trip was a couple of years before the fall of the government, so 2019.
And what was the country like at those times?
It was a very different experience because I couldn't travel through the majority of the country at the time because it was too dangerous. The Taliban controlled almost all of the country, so it was too dangerous to travel in between a lot of the places that I really wanted to go to. And, so I picked areas that were safe to go to, like the Wakhan Valley in the northeast, and then also the Bamiyan, but in the most recent trip, when the Taliban took over, the war, being that the war was over, there was no more fighting, and it was more or less safe to go anywhere in the country at that point.
Can you show the folks where exactly you went on each one of your trips? We have the slide up now. It should be on the TV.
Yep.
So if you want to just show people, and we can switch to the slide on the media so folks can see at home. But yeah.
Okay, so the very first time I went to Afghanistan, I traveled across into the Wakhan corridor up here in the northeast through Tajikistan, and I spent a week there. The second time in 2019, I flew into Kabul, traveled by plane into Bamiyan. It was too unsafe to travel overland from Kabul to Bamiyan, so that's why I had to fly. The third time in 2022, I flew into Kabul. This time, I actually traveled overland to Bamiyan, because now it was safe, and there were no flights anyways. And from Bamiyan, I traveled through the center of the country all the way to Charan. How do I pronounce that? Thank you. Pretty close. And then I went to the Minaret of Jam, and all the way to Herat, and then I went down here through the south, all the way to Kandahar, and then back up to Kabul. So this route here would have been suicidal back during the war. There's no way I could have done that. So a big reason for why I wanted to come back to Afghanistan after the Taliban took over is because now it was safe to travel to these regions that weren't previously safe.
And then Matt, as you come back up here, I looked on your website and you said that Afghanistan was one of your favorite countries in the entire world. And you've now been to every country in the entire world. So you have a good frame of reference for that. Afghanistan is number 2. What makes it so special to you?
So it's one of my favorite countries because it's so raw. It's just so adventurous. You truly feel like an explorer when you go there. You feel like Marco Polo, it's just that there's no commercial tourism. There's no, it's a real experience, Somebody mentioned fake and real. Like when you're there, everything is real. Nothing is fake. And the people are very real and genuine and welcoming. And I really love the people, the ancient culture. I love history. I'm a big student of history, and there's so much history in Afghanistan. It's unbelievable.
And you've been going there for nearly 15 years now. So how has the country changed, just in the first couple times you've been there?
It's changed in so many different ways. It's hard to answer that question.
Sure.
So with limited amount of time. But there was a sense of hopelessness when I first went there that eventually the Taliban would take over and that the country would descend into war for many years afterwards. So everybody kind of, I felt like a lot of people knew that that was inevitable and they were depressed about that. But now that the Taliban have taken over and there isn't a war, there is a lot of relief about that. The economy is in shambles, and yeah, the Taliban are the Taliban, but there isn't a state of war. The country is more or less at peace now.
Yeah. And it sounded like you couldn't travel as extensively before the Taliban as you could now, perhaps counterintuitively.
Correct. Yep. I couldn't travel to most of the country before, but now I can.
So how was getting there before different than this time? It sounds like it was harder. Was it? You know, how was
it was a lot harder it was much harder, ironically, to get a visa from the government that was friendly with the U.S.
Gotcha.
It was really difficult. It took me months to get the visa, and one of my friends never actually got his visa. The ambassador in Washington, D.C. at some point got mad and threw my passport at the courier. Just said no, and almost denied me right there in the spot. And then I got my visa the day before I was planning to leave on my flight.
Right.
And it was my passport was sent overnight and arrived at a FedEx building that I picked it up on the way to LAX.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was. With the Taliban in charge, it took me 30 minutes to get a visa. And Peshawar, I just went to Pakistan. There was a long line of Afghans to get visas. Me and my friend showed up, traveled with my friend John, and we showed up and we're in the line, and all the Taliban saw us, quickly grabbed us, escorted us to the front of the line. And so, ironically, it was a lot easier to get a visa now under the Taliban than it was under the U.S.-friendly government.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Why do you think that is? Why do you think they brought you and your traveling companion, to the front of the line before everyone else?
It's a customary kind of hospitality.
Okay.
Their custom of hospitality, and I think they're really desperate to try to promote Afghanistan as a legitimate country, friendly country that's welcoming of all. I mean, I'm not a spokesperson for the Taliban, but this is what I do think that they're trying to welcome foreigners.
Sure.
At least some parts of the Taliban are.
Sure.
Right, and they want to promote it as a peaceful place, and they need the money, they need the tourism dollars badly. And the economy is in shambles now that the United States is not there.
I was going to say, they're used to having American money in there, so maybe they want some more of that.
Yep.
So real quick, I just want to know, how did you decide to go to Afghanistan, like, now? How did you decide, like, what was it about this time?
I'll tell you, one, I love the country, and I wanted to see more of it. I wanted to see the Minaret of Jam. I wanted to see the South. And my concern was that the country would descend back into war again, that there would be infighting with the Taliban, civil war. So I wanted to get there while this window of peace existed. And I also wanted to get there before I had my daughter. I knew I was at some point, gonna have a child. And I didn't want to go to Afghanistan as a new parent yet, I guess. So there was that little window for many reasons that I took advantage of.
Okay. And so, like, what was the process of booking your trip like? Did you go through an agency? Did you plan it all out yourself? What was that like?
I had so there was no agencies or anything like that. Almost all of the guides fled the country after the Taliban took over. So there really wasn't anybody to talk to. There were only a few guides that stayed back. So I had and there weren't many travelers. There was hardly any travelers that were there before me.
Right.
So especially American ones. There were a few, and I reached out to them, and we corresponded a lot. And I was given the name of a local guide, and we talked a lot about the trip, and I was very concerned about how safe it was and everything. And so, through those travelers and through that guide, And through some other local Afghanis that I knew in the United States, I decided, after very thorough research, I decided to go.
Sure. And like, just about your guide, shout out to your guide. Like, they are an indispensable part of your trip, aren't they? You really can't do anything, go anywhere without them.
You could travel around. It's possible. There have been travelers that have gone and have done it without guides. However, I didn't want to take that risk because you need to get permits to travel. I went there and I played by the rules of the Taliban. Didn't want to take any risks. You have to get permits, and at the time when I went, you had to go with a certified guide that was approved by the Taliban, and so I did all that, but there have been some travelers that didn't do that, and some of them are imprisoned. So
Right.
most of them have not been, but yeah, I didn't want to take the risk,
Sure. So, real quick, I want to go back to getting to Kabul from Peshawar. Getting the visa was pretty easy, and then the flight into Kabul. Tell us about that.
Yeah, getting the visa was very easy, and then you could travel overland into Kabul from Peshawar. I didn't want to take that risk because there had been some incidents where the border was closed. I was on a limited schedule, so it was a lot easier to just fly on the only airline at the time that was flying into Afghanistan, the national airline, CAM Airways. And so they were the most reliable and the only airline that was flying into Afghanistan. So it was an hour flight from Islamabad, actually.
Ah, okay.
Yep, so I had to go back to Islamabad from Peshawar and then fly directly into Kabul.
Okay, and then so you get to Kabul. Is there any kind of, customs? Is there any kind of welcoming committee for tourists?
So it was the weirdest experience because, I'll be honest with you, I was apprehensive about this trip. It was hard to sleep, especially when I knew it was actually, for many months, I knew it was going to be going to Afghanistan. And I'm like, I was worried, I was concerned about how the Taliban would receive me. And then the week before, I'm like, I'm actually going. And I started to kind of lose sleep over it. And especially since there was the drone strike on one of the architects of 9/11 that happened 2 weeks before my trip in Kabul. And Al-Qaeda, one of the senior members of Al-Qaeda was blown up by a drone in Kabul 2 weeks before my trip. And so I was concerned, now all of the advice that I've been given by these other travelers, I don't know if that's still relevant because how is the government now going to respond to me given the recent news?
Well, there's not going to be less tension after that.
Yeah, so I relied on a lot of my Afghan friends here in San Diego who had family back in Kabul. They kind of scouted out, there were some other foreigners that were journalists and whatnot, and they did some recon for me, and then they gave me some intel back to let me know kind of how things are, what kind of tensions there might be over there. And it seemed like the Taliban were just trying to cover up this. They didn't want any incidents, they didn't want any issues with foreign countries, so they're trying to cover it up. So I felt like it was still safe for me to go, and I did.
Okay. And then did you notice that tension?
I didn't notice any tension when I first arrived.
That's great.
It was weird. I didn't meet the Taliban at the airport. They didn't. Most of the airport workers were the same airport workers and immigration workers that were there from the previous government. Because the Taliban, they didn't replace a lot of them because they didn't know how to run an airport. They didn't know how to run a lot of these government agencies. They had no experience with that. So they actually, for those that didn't flee, who stayed behind, they allowed them to keep their jobs, for most of them.
So what I'm hearing is that bureaucrats and administrators are an indispensable part of our society. Is that
exactly
fair to say? All right, excellent. Okay, so you're through the airport, and what were your initial impressions?
Well, my initial impressions, when I landed, I saw all of the American hangars and military equipment, helicopters and everything that now belong to the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I left the last time, I saw those same bases, and I saw a lot of American soldiers down walking about. And I remember flying away, and I was deeply concerned about a lot of the soldiers and what the outcome would be, going
Right.
forward into the future. And now it was kind of sad to see all this abandoned equipment. And then when I left the airport, there was a big mural of Masood, who was there, who was a big opponent of the Taliban, pro-West. His mural was completely gone, wiped away by the Taliban, and so there was no evidence of Masood anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the streets, just driving down the streets, I saw a lot of Taliban in the back of
Right.
Jeeps, carrying their AK-47s, also American machine guns, Taliban flags. So there was a lot of evidence of them. They were all
Sure.
over the place. Yeah, and lots of billboards with Taliban propaganda. Like, this current slide right here shows a Taliban soldier who's crossing the road, stopping traffic to help children cross the road, which I thought was funny because now they're trying, instead of being these like main,
Right. Trying to instill fear. It's
trying to instill fear and being insurgents, they're trying to show that they're gentle and that they're caring, and that the people do not need to be afraid of them because they are now there to protect them.
Yeah, right, for sure. And then, so what did you do to kind of not assimilate, but make yourself blend in a little bit more? You grew your hair out, you grew your beard out,
yeah.
like what kind of clothes did you wear?
So I wore
during your trip?
I wore the local clothing, which is very commonly wore, especially outside of the cities, Kabul. Very few people wear Western clothing, so most men wear the shalwar kameez and this kind of scarf and this Islamic hat right here, and then most men have beards and that longer hair. So, and a lot of people kind of have a Caucasian look. There's a big ethnic mix in Afghanistan. There's a lot of different cultures. So there were some people that actually kind of look like me, and
Okay.
I met a Taliban with blue eyes and blonde hair.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of, from a distance, my goal is to kind of blend in as much as possible.
And you're,
So,
and you're pretty tall. Like, were people like as tall as you, or not as much?
Some of them were pretty big, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if they were as tall as me normally, but there were some pretty big people, pretty stocky. Yeah.
And so how long were you in Kabul before you moved on to the next leg of your trip?
I didn't want to spend a lot of time in Kabul.
Sure.
I had a very ambitious plan to see a lot of the country, and I knew the roads would be really bad, and they had a big flood in the days before my trip, which washed away a lot of the roads as it is. So I didn't know how long it was going to take to drive all the way around the country. And I also did expect that I would be detained by the Taliban, and I didn't know how long.
Foreshadow.
But they were, they're suspicious, and they're not exactly unified. So I expected that part of my trip would be spent in detention. So I didn't want to waste any time in Kabul, which is one of the safest areas to be.
So where did you go from Kabul?
From Kabul, we went straight to Bamiyan. So we spent one night in Kabul.
Okay.
And then went to Bamiyan, drove through Wardak province.
And so what are these photos of here?
So driving through Wardak province, a lot of these areas, and Wardak, and also, what did you say the province was? We kind of...
It's called Chifcharan.
No, on the way to Bamiyan from...
Parwan?
Yeah, Parawan, thank you. So there's two provinces that we drove through. And a lot of the road there were a lot of potholes from IEDs from the war. A lot of explosions that occurred. And then there were a lot of these miniature little government bases that were built to fortify the road where government soldiers were. And they were just blown up, covered in bullet holes. We drove through a lot of Pashtun areas. This area was very hostile to the previous government, and they were very hostile to American soldiers. So there's no way I could have driven through there before. I had to fly.
Right.
And even now, like we didn't want to stop. My driver, who was Hazara, he did not want to stop, and in case there were still some hostile elements to the population there, because
Right.
we're American and they're not used to seeing Americans, and they don't know what a tourist is at all. Whenever we were asked, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
My guide never said they're tourists. He said we're journalists, because
Okay.
they don't know what a tourist is.
Right.
They can't even comprehend, especially the Taliban. You say you're a journalist, and I've always thought, okay, the last thing you want to say when you're traveling is you're a journalist, because that's
Right. It's like,
Right.
are you a spy? What are you saying about our
so
country?
it was weird to be
Yeah.
throwing out journalists as the first response.
Well, you had a big old camera with you, so it made it a little bit more credible.
I had an SLR camera, which I always take with me, but I did try to hide that under my shalwar kameez.
Right.
I tried to tuck that underneath.
And why is that? That was for a pretty specific reason, wasn't it?
People can be very averse to a camera, especially. So it was very rare that I saw women out in public, especially outside of Kabul.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did, a lot of times they would be wearing a burqa. Maybe not as much in the Hazara areas.
Okay.
They would be wearing like a veil. But once you got out past the Hazara areas, more into the Pashtun areas and stuff like that, you rarely saw any women at all. And if you did, they were wearing burqas. And if I had my camera, if anyone ever suspected I was pointing my camera in the direction of a woman, that could imprison me, or worse, I could get shot right there on site.
Mm-hmm. And so that's why, if we can go back to the pictures of the houses for a second, Phoebes, that's why
yes.
the pictures look like this,
Yes.
because you had to be a little bit secretive when you took them, right?
I have a big zoom lens, and I would zoom in from very far away, because the people are even opposed to you taking pictures of their houses, because you may, even from hundreds of yards away, they think that you might capture an image of a woman and their family,
Mm-hmm.
and they consider that a dishonor to that woman and to their entire family,
Okay.
especially the men.
So while you're driving through this area, what kind of precautions are you taking to ensure your safety?
So to basically try to blend in as much as possible, not get out, pointing my camera around, be very respectful to people. We didn't stop in between, in certain areas. My guide was very knowledgeable.
Yeah.
He had traveled a lot with journalists during the war. He knew what villages were hostile and which ones weren't. So when we drove through ones that were considered hostile, we didn't stop. Except for the one time where our tire completely seized up and we had to stop, and but luckily everything went fine.
Wait, so what happened with that? I think we have a picture of it. Can we get the one with the van with the Christmas lights on it, Phoebe?
That's like way ahead. Maybe I jumped ahead. Whoops.
That's okay. Give her a second. She's good. She'll find it.
There it is. Yeah.
So what happened
So
there?
I didn't even take out my SLR camera, because we're in an area now. We're in Gore province, and this is an area, all Pashtun, very hostile, lots of fighting back in the war. And our tire just seizes up, the brakes seize up, and we were unable to go anywhere. And luckily, we at least were like outside of a village instead of in the middle of nowhere. And this little minivan drives by. It's dark, and we expected to be spending the night there. There's no phone reception. Of course, we can't call a mechanic or anything. And, But this little minivan, it's a wedding party. They have these like Christmas lights flashing. And there's a lot of women inside, and there's some men, and they pull over, and the men all get out. The women all stay inside and cover up with their burqas.
Right.
And the men all get out, and everybody is helping. Everyone's a mechanic now. Everyone's an expert on this tire. And they're all pulling out whatever rudimentary tools they have. and trying to take the tire off and pull the brakes apart, and somehow, I don't know how, but they MacGyvered it and got it back on, and it worked long enough. We were able, the brakes unseized, and we're able to drive another 8 hours at night to get back to Herat.
Like, teamwork makes the dream work, man. Like,
And then we
so.
took the car to a real mechanic after that.
For
in
sure.
Herat.
And like that, but that whole time, I remember reading like you and your friend were silent because
We didn't say anything because part of me is like, these people are really kind, and I don't think they would have cared if we were foreigners, but we didn't want to, we were very vulnerable at the time. We're out in the middle of nowhere. We're stranded. We don't know for sure. We don't know how they're going to react, especially if they find out we're Americans. There weren't many foreigners yet in Afghanistan, so we're being as safe and cautious as possible.
Sure.
So we didn't talk. We didn't say anything. We didn't speak in English. But some of these other men would turn to me and they'd try to talk to me in Pashtun, and I was like, mm-hmm. And I just point over at the guide, and then they would turn and talk to him, and I just didn't want to say anything. But they never figured out. They never once figured out that we were foreigners. Weirdly
All right.
enough.
Good job. Good
Then
job blending in.
we kind of hung out in the background too. We didn't away from all the repairs and stuff.
Right. Well, let the mechanics do their thing, and
Yeah.
you'll be over there. So, how do you think, kind of in taking a larger look, how do you think the sort of impacts of war affected your time there? Like, what were the sort of like echoes you could still feel from that?
Well, one, there was a lot of visible evidence of the war,
Yeah.
right? There's all kinds of bullet holes, IEDs. There are lots of martyr flags. Every family has been impacted, especially in certain provinces where lots of families, like more so like in the Pashtun areas, like Helmand province and stuff, most families have lost many family members, women, children, men, from the war. So there's lots of, and you see and there are a lot of people that are walking with crutches or missing limbs or missing body parts. So there's definitely a lot of real visible evidence of the war.
Right.
And economy is destroyed. It's in shambles because of the war. There's a lot of room to grow now that the war is over. But I think that there's sort of there are a lot of people that there's a lot of despair because the Taliban are in control, but there are some people that are happy that at least the war is over. They're like, okay, we have the Taliban, we don't like them, but the war is over.
Right.
So now we can try to recover from this. The country can grow again.
Right. So returning to Bamiyan, how was Bamiyan different than when the first time you went?
So Bamiyan was, there were more Pashtun people. I didn't see any, it was all Hazara. This was an area that had been safe for many years and pro-Western because the Hazara people live there. They're Shiite. And the first time I went there, I didn't meet any Pashtun people. I definitely didn't meet any Taliban people. So it was strange to go from an area that was so tolerant, and now there's a lot of Pashtun people that are moving into this region from the south, the more hostile desert area, to the, it's more fertile. It's a more generous kind of climate. So you have a lot of people that are moving and probably being given land from the Taliban. But it was crazy to see the Taliban flag hanging over the Buddha caves in Bamiyan.
Right.
The same Taliban that blew them up, that are now trying to preserve them.
And I thought that was really interesting when I read that. It's like, did you notice that a lot? Previous sort of attitudes of destruction turning into attitudes of conservation and preservation a lot?
There is, but it's not because they're so interested in preserving the culture. They're interested in the revenue it can generate from tourism.
I see.
It's the main reason.
Sure.
So they've been ordered to protect it. The same governor of Bamiyan, the same Taliban governor that is there now, was the same Taliban general that ordered the destruction of the Buddhas.
Wow.
Yeah, and now he's tasked with protecting them. Yeah.
Sometimes life presents you
And
fast.
I thought like it was a very interesting, for thousands, these Buddha statues stood there for thousands of years, despite all the invading armies, including Genghis Khan, who massacred the entire population. But they always respected these Buddhas, and they allowed them to stand. These are all foreign armies. It was the Afghan, a portion of Afghanistan, the Taliban, which are from there, who finally blew them up after all these thousands of years,
Yeah. And did you ever talk to that governor? What does he think about
I
his new
didn't meet him, but there was a chance that we could have, because we did have to go to the ministry to get a stamp for a permit, and sometimes he's there, or sometimes I've heard that he might actually come to your hotel and seek you out just to meet you if you're a foreigner.
Okay.
But there was a holiday. It was a holiday for independence from the British, I think, when I was there. They have many different independence holidays in Afghanistan.
Imagine so.
So
Soviets,
he
Americans.
was off partying somewhere.
Nice.
I don't know.
We
He
love that
wasn't
for
in the
him.
ministry.
But okay, I just want to go back for a second, Phoebes. That is a picture of you in, not that one, go back. There we go. That is a picture of you in one of the Buddha recesses.
Yeah, so that is in one of the caves underneath one of the giant Buddhas, a 200-foot tall one. The first time I went to Bamiyan, I wasn't allowed to go in there. There was scaffolding. It was all blocked off. You weren't allowed to go in there. Now under the Taliban, they're like, oh, whatever, you can go anywhere you want. They don't care. So we ventured into this cave. It was probably prohibited from going in there for good reasons, because it's too dangerous, falling rocks and stuff.
And fair enough. But, it's not the only. Did we already pass the point where you went to the ancient fort and looked for the hidden pool?
No, so that was the next place we went to.
Ooh, can we talk
So
about that?
spent a night in Bamiyan, and then we drove to the Castle of 40 Towers, which is this place right here. And I think we were the first foreigners to go there since the takeover of the Taliban.
Wow.
And this is really an amazing place. We were required, because we were in a different province, we were required to get a stamp from the Taliban in our permit, but they were like 2 hours away. So there was no way we could get that stamp, and we were way out here, and we decided to chance it and just spend the night there. And we just went into a village and asked if we could spend the night in a home of a family. We asked the man of the household if we could stay there, and we did. And they cooked for us, and we never actually met any of the women of the family.
Sure.
It was just him and his sons who'd present themselves and bring the food to us. And I climbed up to the top of this castle, which was up this gigantic scree slope. It was super steep and sketchy. And after almost killing myself, the guy told me, "Oh, there's an easy way. You can just drive up the backside, and then you're on the top. And you're going to need 4-wheel drive," which we had. We did that afterwards, and then there are all these cool tunnels that we could go down into. But he said that if you really like the tunnels, there's a really long one that you can go to that takes you into this pool, the king's pool, and there's water in there. He said he had been in there. No foreigner has ever been in there. And it was where the king used to go with his concubines. And I thought, that sounds awesome. I have to go check that out. Let's do that. It was already dark.
Absolutely.
Couldn't do that at night. And then
Bummer.
we did that. So we decided we're going to do that. We're going to wake up early before sunrise, and we're going to go out there and do that. And I was thinking it's going to be easy. We're just going to drive up to the top and going through an easy way. No, this time we had to hike back up the scree slope again.
The sketchy scree
The
slope that you
sketchy
almost killed
one.
yourself on.
And there was a hole, and it just like, it went straight down. It was like a 20-foot drop. And then this tunnel it was really steep, just dived down into the mountain. And my friend and the others were like, "I don't know about this. This is way too sketchy." And I was pretty committed to it. I'm like, we got to go for this. It's too cool to abandon. We already,
I feel the same way.
we had like a 10-hour plus drive ahead of us still.
Bummer.
So I gave it the best shot, and after like 20 minutes or so of crawling through this tunnel and rock falling around me, I was with the village guy, and I'm like, all right, are we almost there? And he's like, no, we just started. We have like, we're not even a tenth of the way there yet.
Oh boy, all right.
I'm like, I thought you said it was really short. And he's like, it is, it's not far. And
I guess we have to do it.
so we didn't make it. I had to make the unfortunate decision to turn back, a decision I'll always regret. I'll have to go back.
It gives you something to go back for, though.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
If that tunnel hasn't collapsed by now.
Hey, only good energy. We're going back to that tunnel. Okay, so after that, where did you go from there?
So then we drove to, how do you say that town again? Thank you. All right, Chakachan. So through Gore province,
Okay.
through a really remote area, dirt, rough roads. We had 4-wheel drive. We had a Toyota Land Cruiser, the only one anywhere. Everybody drives a Toyota Corolla. I don't know why. Everybody
gang.
loves that car.
Yeah.
And they beat the hell out of that car. It can drive under any condition imaginable somehow. It defies gravity and the laws of nature.
It's true. Yeah.
Those things passed us in our Land Cruiser, and we broke down. I never saw one Corolla that broke down. So
Yeah.
they have magical powers.
They don't
I
believe in
believe.
that. It's, yeah. Corollas don't do that.
So we drove up over some really high mountain passes through some incredible landscapes. Sometimes there would just be nothing, just desolation for as far as you can see. But wherever there was life and villages and fertile landscapes, it was near a river. It was near
Sure.
wherever there was a river. If there wasn't a river, it was just nothing. And the people were incredibly photogenic, and I wanted to stop and visit them, and I knew every villager would invite us to tea because that's how hospitable they are, but we were just always on the move. We were constantly in the move, and these were, the villages didn't have electricity. There's no electricity. It really was like venturing back in time, and we saw a lot of the nomads. They're nomadic caravans. They're
Right.
traveling through the country. The Kuchi nomads, a lot of the Taliban were Kuchis. They're Pashtun people, and they still fight with a lot of the villagers who own land because they're competing for land for their grazing animals. They have donkeys, they have goats, they have cows, they have camels, and they're constantly on the move. Some of them have tents that are made out of camel fur. Some of them have modern tents that are made out of synthetic fibers coming from China. They're very fascinating people, and I so badly wanted to stay with them and get to know them.
Right.
But they also have a reputation for being extremely conservative and xenophobic, so we were very concerned, and there's always women in every family too. So
Right.
it would have been very beneficial if there were women traveling with us.
Right. Yeah. I was wondering about that. How do you think that would have changed the trip for you if you had women with you?
It would have opened more doors because they
Okay.
could have connected with the women in some of these like nomadic families and other villages that we had gone to. Of course, whereas we go in there and they're very protective of their women, so a lot of the men didn't even want us to enter into villages or into certain areas because of that reason. So it would have opened more doors, I think.
Okay. Do you think it would have, sort of invited a little bit more community? Like if it had been, you and your wife, say, like, would you have been able to enter these homes and like, speak with everyone as a family? Or would it still have just been the men and the sons?
It would still be very divided.
Okay.
The men would be with the men and the women would be with the women.
Gotcha.
And I would still, as a man, never actually lay eyes on the women.
Okay.
That's my experience in travels around in Pakistan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. But so do they have the sort of similar rules in regards to photographing their women, the Kuchi nomads?
Yes, they were very strict, very, so I wanted to be respectful and careful, you know,
Sure.
not to offend them and also not to get shot. So didn't want to take photos of them.
Good goals.
And be seen taking photos of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to be sneaky about it with my Zoom, and I got spotted, and I just remember there was a woman on a camel screaming,
Mm-hmm.
and I asked the guide, "What is she saying?" And he was like, "Oh, she's yelling at the other men that there's a man who's taking photos with a big camera of me."
Oh. Uh-oh.
And then we sped up and we drove past them. And yeah, no, the guide was like, "Hey, you know, they all have assault rifles and
Yeah.
they will use them,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they think that there's a bunch of men photographing their women."
Right. All right. And then, so the big goal for you, one of the big, attractions of this trip for you was the Minaret of Jam. Is that right?
Yes.
So what is the Minaret of Jam, and why was it, what makes it so significant to you?
So you can see in this photo, so it's a fabled minaret. It's the second tallest ancient minaret in the world. The first one is in New Delhi. But this one is special because it's so ornate. It's got these ancient tiles and some bits and pieces of turquoise on it. I can't remember how it's hundreds of feet tall. I can't remember the exact height. And as soon as you lay eyes on it, it just stands alone in the middle of this majestic canyon. There's nothing else around it, and it's so beautiful, and it just draws you right in. And it's very remote, and for ages I'd wanted to go there, but it was just too dangerous to go there because of the
Right.
war. There wasn't a road to it until recently. Explore. It's been a highly sought after place by lots of explorers for a long time.
But hang on.
And-
If a minaret is to call people to prayer, right?
Right?
But this minaret, it's in the middle of a riverbed. There's nothing around it. So maybe this is a dumb question, but why is it there?
Nobody really knows exactly. It's believed that maybe it was part of a mosque. Maybe the mosque was washed away by a flash flood or blown up or collapsed during an earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's the case, then why is the minaret still standing? It comes from it's 1,000+ years old. Maybe it was built during the Gorid dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
It was part of what is believed to be the Turquoise Mountain civilization, or part of that city. This was part of the Silk Road, so that it acquired a lot of its wealth by taxing travelers that were passing through these
Right.
canyons at the time on the Silk Road.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was a watchtower. It's possible that it was built as a watchtower, or just as a symbol of power and wealth by the king at the time. Nobody really knows.
Okay.
And that's part of the it's part of the mystery, the excitement of going there is that
Right.
nobody, there's not much that's known about it.
Yeah.
And there are some old ruined buildings up in the mountains,
Mm-hmm.
some fortifications, and there's a lot to explore there. And there are treasure diggers that are there or looters and Taliban that are digging, looking for treasures, and probably not to sadly protect them, but to sell them on the black market.
Right. Yeah. And so when you got there, there were Taliban there, right?
Yep.
And so, I don't know, I feel like you've interacted with the Taliban a few times by this point.
Yeah.
So what was your experience with them like?
Right. So by now I'd gone through many checkpoints with the Taliban. So I was feeling more comfortable with them.
That's good.
Like some of the checkpoints, like I remember one, and most of the time they would just shake our hand or just even ignore us and tell us to continue on. Sometimes it would stop us. check her passport, and they would realize that we're American. And I remember one Taliban at a checkpoint, when he saw my passport, he was kind of shocked, and he said something in Pashtun that caused my guide and my driver to laugh. And then when we drove away, I'm like, well, what did he say? And he's like, he just joked. He's like, the Americans just don't ever want to leave Afghanistan, do they? And 'cause we were the first Americans that he had met since the war, and
Sure.
he just couldn't believe that. Why would they come back? So we were kind of accustomed to them. That on the most part, they were pleasant to us. They shook our hands. I never received any hostilities from them. Sometimes it would be like, one guy shook my hand. He's like, Mujahideen, good. He said, America, Canada, good. And like, I don't know why he clumped us in together like that, but yeah, they weren't. I was feeling okay. I was feeling relieved that, all right, they're not treating us poorly. Maybe we won't get locked up or in prison so far. So then we get to the Taliban, the Minaret of Jam, and if you go back to the last slide, at the Minaret of Jam. Well, yeah, so this is one of the Taliban. They were very friendly at the Minaret of Jam. These guys were just like tourists, like us. They're passing through in their motorbikes, and they wanted to see the Minaret of Jam. These are all places that they couldn't see during the war because it's just like, for me, it was too dangerous for them to be traveling freely through the country. So the Taliban are now, just like me, exploring their own country. They're coming out from the mountains where they were hiding out before, and a lot of them are going into the cities for the first time in their lives. They're experiencing electricity, eating ice cream cones for the first time, going on these little tugboats,
That's really neat.
So the first journalists that came into Afghanistan were taking pictures and kind of making fun of them. So now they're very sensitive. And so a lot of the Taliban that we met, they were opposed to us taking pictures, especially with their guns, because they were told by their generals not to let foreigners take pictures because they make fun of you. So
Well, that's too bad. Can we go back really quickly, Phoebe, to the some of the guys at the Minaret of Jam? There we go. So, these guys are obviously younger.
So this guy, I thought this guy was very friendly, and he kind of reminded me of Keanu Reeves,
I could see it.
like a young Keanu Reeves.
I could see it, like Speed or Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I could see it.
And it was just kind of crazy because I'm hanging out with these guys, drinking tea. I had a Polaroid camera. I took pictures and I gave them all photos of themselves, and they thought that was great. And I'm like, I'm hanging out with the Taliban. This same guy a year ago would have killed me because that's what he was ordered to do.
Yeah.
And you never would have thought twice about it,
Yeah, major street cred.
But now it's like we're friendly, and that's part of the beauty of traveling, especially to places like Afghanistan. My favorite experiences are traveling to countries like this to get a real kind of experience, a real raw experience.
Absolutely. And so from there, I forget the name of the city, but where'd you go from the Minaret of Jam? What was the next
Then
stop?
I went to Herat.
Gotcha.
All the way to Herat, which was a very long drive. That's when we broke down, and then we got lost somewhere. There was a lot of construction on the road that had started during the previous government. Then it was abruptly abandoned when all the American money ran out.
Sure.
And but the problem is that the road was poorly marked and nobody knew where to go. So we got lost in the middle of the night, and we were all extremely tired. But by the time we finally arrived, it was like 3 a.m. We got to Herat, we got to our hotel, and it was air conditioning, and it was even Wi-Fi and pizza.
Wow. Oh my God.
And
you had an interesting
Afghanistan
experience
has
with pizza.
great pizza, especially in the cities.
All right. Shout out Afghanistan
Do you
pizza.
agree? You like the pizza? I love the pizza. Yeah, so I think there a lot of influence. Maybe it's the American influence. Maybe that's where the pizza came from. But also volleyball. I saw a lot of people playing, even Taliban, playing volleyball on the side of the road.
Taliban playing volleyball.
I thought that was very interesting.
Very interesting. But so once you were in Herat,
Yeah.
you saw, I mean, there were two just incredible things you saw. So one was the Blue Mosque, right?
The Blue Mosque is, it was built during the Gorid dynasty. It's a 1,000-year-old mosque. It's blue tiles, incredibly photogenic. And I walked in there, and I remember my guide said, it's okay to take photos here. Don't worry, the Taliban are nice. And there's all these guys walking around with guns. They're all Taliban. And I'm like, all right, I took a quick photo, and instantly a Taliban guy walks over. Who are these foreigners? Who are these guys taking pictures? And he's like, they're journalists. He's like, are they Muslim? And he's like, no.
Okay.
And I was like, why did you tell them no? Like, what? And he's like, well, if I tell them you're Muslim, they're going to know you're lying, and that's bad.
Yeah.
So better to be honest.
Better
like
be honest, yeah.
And we trusted him. I mean, we relied on his best judgment,
Right.
which always turned out to be very sound.
Yeah.
So, and then they left us alone. They walked away. But they didn't seem too thrilled. So at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm tucking my camera back into my shalwar kameez. And I hid in a corner, and I'm like, I got to take pictures here, though. It's too beautiful to not take photos. So I just told my guy, just stand out there, and I'm going to take some portrait shots of you. But I wasn't taking pictures of him.
Did anyone ever try to convert you?
All the
To Islam?
time. All the time. The Taliban constantly tried to convert us. And in a way, it was kind of weird because it's like these guys are trying to kill me, suddenly care about my soul. And they're like Jehovah's Witnesses coming to my door or something, you know, like.
Right.
And because I was at one fort Alexander the Great built, and the Taliban that took her ticket, he's like, yeah, do you want to convert to Islam? You just have to say these lines up here in the Shahada and their flag, and that's it. You're Muslim. And then I can show you to all the secret parts of the castle.
Okay.
You'll be my brother in paradise. You know, I didn't want to. I'm Christian, okay, and I didn't want to tell him that, all right, I'm going to convert just so I can see the other parts of the castle. But I'm like, we don't need to be fellow Muslims to be brothers. I'm like, here, just shake my hand. You're my brother. You know, it's okay. And he was like, yes, we're brothers, and it was cool. We had a good conversation. It was fascinating to be talking to the Taliban and making inroads and kind of building some sort of friendship.
Yeah.
And that's.
Just real rapport between people.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and that happened all the time.
Do you think there actually were sacred areas of the castle, or do you think that was just like a marketing trick to get you to convert?
There's definitely a lot more to the castle, for sure.
Okay.
There are a lot of locked doors. I tried to open them.
Well, maybe if you had converted, they would have opened. But okay, so the Blue Mosque, and then what else? What else did you see while you were there?
We went to the Jihad Museum.
All right, and what is that?
The Jihad
Feels
Museum.
self-explanatory, but what is
The Jihad
it?
Museum has been there for a while, so, but it featured the Mujahideen that fought against the Russians when the Russians invaded. So Masood was featured there. He's no longer there. All of his portraits are removed.
Right.
Now there's been a new addition, the American Jihad. So now they have portraits of the one-eyed mullah right here, who was the founder of the Taliban. So he's there. So now they're adding all kinds of American weaponry and equipment seized during the war to the museum. And we weren't actually allowed to go there. We were told that foreigners are no longer allowed, according to the Ministry of Vice and Virtue of the Taliban.
Okay.
But they let us in. They said, all right, only Afghanis are allowed. So I had to hide my camera and just take pictures with my phone.
Surprised they didn't try to make you convert there.
There were no Taliban there
at
that point. These were the same ticket keepers from the previous government.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Those are pictures.
What is this
That's
image?
a picture. So a lot of the Taliban, they have martyrdom photos. So they show a picture of a soldier when he was alive and then when he was killed. martyred. So there were a lot of pictures like that. There are hundreds of them. Pretty morbid.
And so, after that
We
lovely
went to
excursion,
another
you went
mosque,
to, yeah, okay.
to a Sufi mosque. It was a firebrand Sufi cleric who was allied with the Taliban. And we went here, and there weren't any Taliban here, but there were hundreds of worshipers. And it was a more relaxed kind of environment. And then a week after we were there, an ISIS suicide bomber came here and blew himself up while kissing the ring of the cleric, killing, I think, 100 people or so in this very mosque. So, yes, Afghanistan is a lot safer than it used to be, but there's still risk in going there.
Yeah. And so, you know, and yeah, like you said, it's safer, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always safe.
Even the Taliban are considered too liberal for a lot of groups, a lot of the terrorist groups in Afghanistan, ISIS.
Right. And so, okay, what is this a picture of here?
So from Herat, I drove down through the south of Afghanistan, through Helmand province, and then all the way to Kandahar.
Yeah.
This is where some of the most ferocious fighting occurred during the war. And actually the road was much better because of all of the U.S. tax dollars that went into building this road. Mm-hmm. It was a great road, except for the areas that were blown up by the IEDs.
Yeah.
There was always a martyrdom flag that was placed there by the Pashtun people because of the suicide bomber that blew themselves up.
So a martyrdom flag goes wherever someone died.
Somebody was, someone died, and
Blew themselves
all the bridges were gone, blown up.
Huh.
There were no bridges left, so we usually, if we crossed a river, we'd have to drive down and around over some stream or something like that.
Okay.
Because all the bridges had already been taken out, and they weren't replaced. And we passed through the most desolate villages. Like, it was a very Martian-like landscape.
Sure.
Another place where I just so desperately wanted to visit and meet the people, but these are areas that my guide was very worried about. He's like, these are very hostile people. I mean, we don't know how they're going to react. Maybe they're going to be very welcoming, and most likely they would have, but we didn't know. And so we were concerned that we didn't wear sunglasses because nobody wore sunglasses in this part of Afghanistan. So if you wear sunglasses, you're obviously foreign. And even when we pulled over to urinate, we didn't stand up and do it like we often did, the Western style. You squat down, kind of in the Islamic fashion, and you never face towards Mecca because that would be incredibly insulting. So we took a lot of precautions to avoid looking like a foreigner in these areas, and we drove straight through the villages. And all the checkpoints, the Taliban, they never assumed that we were foreigners because why would there be any foreigners in this part of Afghanistan? So they just waved us through. You can see how empty the road is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Miles
hardly
and miles
anybody
of
on the
nothing.
road. And we were there in, it could have been 120 degrees, but luckily, because of the monsoons that were wreaking havoc throughout Pakistan and Afghanistan at the time, the temperature was only 100. So it cooled off, yeah.
Nice.
It wasn't
and
as
cool.
bad as it could be.
Yeah. All right. And so wait, hang on. Can we go to the next slide? And so so like you would see, obviously how often would these caravans appear?
So we passed a lot of these Kuchi caravans in the desert.
And they're
all over the place, just nomadic, and and there are a lot of opium fields that were now barren. So Helmand, this whole region, is one of the largest opium-producing areas of the world, and largely grown by the Taliban. But I was hoping to see some of the fields in bloom, but we had missed them earlier in the year.
I was gonna say, were they barren or were they just not in season?
Not in season.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But one thing that I did see a lot of was American military bases that were now taken over by the Taliban. A lot of Humvees, a lot of equipment. Camp Bastion was one of them. It was a huge one.
Okay.
And Yeah, one of my coworkers was stationed here, you know, and
Wow.
I took a picture and texted it to him. And
Look
I was
familiar?
very careful not to get caught taking photos here,
Right.
because they would have thought we were spies instantly, and that would have ended very badly for us. So I deleted a lot of the photos, sent them via WhatsApp, and then deleted them, got rid of them.
Okay.
Didn't want to be caught with these photos. And later on that day, I read in the Afghan news that there was a drone strike in Camp Bastion, and it was around the same time that we were passing through, and I was worried. I'm like, what if the Taliban suspected we were somehow affiliated because we were passing through? It was there were rumors that there might be some Al-Qaeda groups that were inside Camp Bastion, and they're harboring in some of these bases, but
you never
who knows? Who
ran into
knows?
any trouble?
There are lots of rumors. No, at this point, no, we didn't have any issues driving
Wow.
through. Going through the checkpoints was easy. We had no issues at this point.
At this point. But did you run into issues later on?
We get to Kandahar. Right as we entered Kandahar, there's a huge sandstorm, and the skies darkened, and it was all red, and it was crazy. And then all of a sudden, it started pissing down rain. And then so Kandahar, that was our entrance into Kandahar. Now we're in the heartland of the Taliban, especially the new government, especially. And my guide told me that he was there with a couple of American journalists only a few weeks before, and they were imprisoned. They were locked up.
Okay.
And it was a very scary experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Taliban that imprisoned them was imprisoned in Guantanamo, actually.
Oh, wow.
So he was very worried about our time in Kandahar.
Fair enough.
And we said, hey, whatever you want to do here, we'll follow. Like,
Sure.
you decide what we need to do, and we respect that because we just want to be safe. And he went to the Ministry of Tourism. We had our permits checked before we left the hotel.
You had the permits.
We had the permit stamped.
It's important.
And we even had the director of tourism for the Taliban government accompany us in the car. So the next day, we go sightseeing, and we decide to let the tourism director take the lead. He's going to decide where we go, what is approved for us to see,
Right.
and we're going to follow his lead. Everything should be okay.
Yeah. Feels pretty.
And we go
standard.
to, this is Kandahar that you can see. It's an oasis out in the middle of the desert. And then in the next slide, we hiked up to the top of this viewpoint where there's a bombed out hotel that the Taliban blew up during the war. And afterwards, we were driving away, and we saw a Kuchi nomad encampment in the outskirts of the city. And I started asking about them because I'm fascinated with the nomads. And I'm like, that's interesting. Why are they here in the city? Or why are they in the outskirts? And then the tourism director's like, would you like to go meet them? We can go meet them. And I'm like, can we really? That's awesome. That would be great.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, it's totally fine. Let's go. I'll just run in and talk to their chief real quick, get permission. He goes in, he comes back out, and my guide is with them. And my guide is very nervous looking now. And that Kuchi chief is on his cell phone. And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, he's talking to the governor, the Taliban governor. And the Taliban governor wants to meet us.
Okay.
And I'm like, we don't have to meet the Kuchis. We can keep going. And I'm like, no, it's too late now. We've been summoned to the governor. And my guy is very worried, and he's not talking a lot at this point. And so we knew we couldn't, there's no escaping. The Taliban are everywhere. There's checkpoints everywhere. They can find us at our hotel. We got to go. We got to roll the dice with our fate. And we have to go meet the governor and find out what happens. And the Kuchi chief gets in the car with us. It's like he's trying to prove that he's loyal to the new governor, and I think we're like his trophy or something that he's going to present to the new governor.
Here.
Yeah, so he goes with us.
Some Americans.
He goes with us and presents us to the Taliban, and it's in I don't know what the name of the base was, but it was an old American Special Forces base that the Taliban have taken over.
Okay.
And so we enter, and then they pat us down. They look at our passports, and they're all armed to the teeth. And the first thing they ask us, and they're very stern, very serious. They're no longer like friendly.
Guys.
They're not friendly like at the checkpoints. They're all bearded, black turbans, and they ask us like, the first question they ask is, "You're American? Did you fight in the war?" And I'm like, "No," and no. But my friend says, "But he's been to Afghanistan before," and I'm like, "Oh, don't."
Why would you do that? Don't throw me under the bus like
and
that.
then I was like, as a tourist, I emphasize as a tourist. Some of the Taliban were speaking little bits and pieces of English, right?
Okay.
But I don't think they understood English. But next thing you know, we're inside the fort, and now we're surrounded by these guys, and they're leading us up these stairs, and we get into this room, and it's like a war council room. It's like 20, 30 guys, all turban, mean-looking, battle-hardened guys. Not like these low-level, like young guys. These were guys that fought in the war, and you could tell by the intense looks in their eyes, like they knew at this point that we're American. I think the word got out, and they didn't seem too thrilled about us being there.
Sure.
And they all had guns. A lot of them were American. Some of them had RPGs. Some of them had whatever, and they had camouflage vests over their shalwar kameezes, and they were intimidating. I was shaking. I was nervous at this point. And we still were allowed, we had our phones on. It's like I was waiting for them to seize their phones, but up until that point, it didn't happen. So they brought us forward, they sat us down on this couch, and the governor was right next to us. They did bring us tea. We're drinking tea.
That's nice.
And we're with the governor, and the governor's an older guy, probably in his 50s, and we shake his hand, we shake everybody's hand. We try to be, we're going to be as polite as hell to all these guys. And so me and my buddy John, we were just looking, exchanged glances, and you could tell, we're very worried at this point. We're like, what kind of stupid decision did we make in coming here? Like, what did we get ourselves into? And then, we had our permit. It was stamped. We're with the tourism director.
So yeah, why did they call you
So we should be okay, right?
Yeah,
but,
right.
Then the governor looks at our permit. And the tourism director is doing all the talking at this point.
Of course.
And the governor takes it. He looks at it. And after a second, he throws it down. And he's like, he's not happy. He gives us a look of strong disapproval. He's like, you have permission from the tourism office, but not from us. Nobody told us you were here.
Well then.
And so this is all through, I didn't know what was going on at the time. A lot of this I found out later on because it was translated through my guide. Like, at the time, I'm just clinging to all the nonverbals I can, trying to figure out what the hell is going on.
Right.
Trying to figure out, am I going to be locked up or shot or what? Or, I don't know what was going on. And all I can do is just read the faces of everybody in the room and try not to stare too long at any one person.
Yeah.
But then this translator came and he sat down and he spoke perfect English.
Oh, wow.
And he was kind of a sinister looking guy, and it kind of made me think, like, he's a translator. What kind of translation did he do back in the war?
Yeah.
Maybe torturing, interrogating, what kind of evil deeds has he done in the past? But he just told me flat out, he's like, hey, we want tourists. We're open to tourism, but the problem is that, your permit isn't valid because you didn't get our permission to be here.
Okay.
And this is the risk of coming to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, is that they're suspicious of foreigners and they're not cohesive yet as to how to handle tourists, especially back then. This was back in less than a year after they took over, so there weren't many tourists that were coming in there yet.
Right.
Since then, it's far more, it's running a lot more smoothly, I think. There's more tourists that are going there and having fewer issues.
Okay.
But at this time, we're just sitting there, we're wondering what the hell's going on. And then so this guy's like, well, you don't have permission. And then he walks away and he's like, we need to take your photos now. So Then a guy comes over and he's got his cell phone and he takes their pictures, and we figure these are our POW photos that they're going to present to the media.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, I'm just going to try not to look worried, just look very strong, confident. But my buddy John breaks out with this big smile, this big grin. And I'm like, what the hell is he doing? He told me he wanted to smile because he thought that would be less worrying to his family later on.
Right, when they see him on TV.
That they would think, okay, he's not scared. If it were to come to that, which we honestly thought it might be at the time.
Right.
So then the governor mentions to our guide, you know, I'm going to hand them over to the intelligence, take them away, and we don't know what's going on. And then we walk away, we're being guided away by these guys with guns. We get it into their car now, and our car follows. And we go to another ex-American Special Forces base, surrounded by barbed wire and gates, more guys with guns, and we're taken into a small room. How much time do I have? No, not much. Okay.
No, you're fine.
So we are seated in this room, and now we're with the intelligence guys. And my guide says to me, "This is jail. We're going to jail." And he's very worried.
So you've spent time in Afghan jail.
It's what he thought it was a jail, and he thought he was not very optimistic at that point.
Okay.
About our outcome. So that was very concerning.
So I guess
and I'm trying, but again, we have to look confident. We have to look tough to these guys. These guys are, if they break you, if you look like you are afraid, they will crush you.
Sure.
They're all about masculinity and trying to show off their masculinity,
right.
And they respect that. So we had to look like we weren't intimidated, even though we were. And then, so they left us in this little room, and I remember I had my phone still. They hadn't seized it, so I texted my wife, and I said, I sent, like, and John also texted, and I'm like, detained by the Taliban, and I sent the coordinates, and I figured somebody has to know from the outside if they take our phones.
Yeah.
This is where we are. This is what happened. I felt bad sending her a message. My buddy John sent a message to his Navy SEAL friend with a GPS coordinates. He said, detained, is in Kandahar, detained by Taliban, and his Navy SEAL friend said, dude, what the fuck are you doing in Kandahar? and that was all.
That's too gnarly. What are you doing?
And yeah, so we're in then the intelligence guys came in, and one by one, it was like a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. It was very weird. Like, one guy would come in, and he would sit down, and we didn't know who was in charge or who wasn't. And there were all these, like, guys that were, like, leering in from the side. It's like, with guns, you know, these Taliban guys. They're all, you could tell they're all excited to, the word was out that these Americans were here, and they all wanted to see up close what an American looked like, because I feel like they, up until now, they had never seen up close.
Sure.
They've been fighting from a distance,
Yeah.
usually drones, fighter jets, helicopters, whatever.
Right.
And so now, for the first time, they could see the enemy up close, and they were fascinated by us. And so I think one by one, some of them would just come in just to interrogate us for fun. I don't know. We didn't really know what was going on. We didn't know who was in charge. One guy came in, and he's like, we detained you because you guys killed our women and children and blew up our villages. And we think all Americans are spies. This is not good. And then
position to start from.
And then he's like, do you work out? Are you a sportsman? And he's like, you look like a sportsman. He's telling me and my buddy, it was very strange, you know. And then he's starting to, like, flex his bicep and everything. And so it's like, is he angry or what is going on here? Again, they're sort of playing games with us, kind of having fun. And we started to realize maybe things are going to be okay. I don't know.
Right.
And then another blonde-haired, blue-eyed Taliban guy came in and started showing us photos of his newborn daughter on his phone. He was all proud. and smiling,
Not
and
allowed
shook
to
our
see women
hands. And
too. Here's a picture of my daughter.
it was very, and then he's like, he gave us a thumbs up. He's like, it's going to be okay. And we're like, we love this guy. And he left. And then the mean guy came back in, and I
Are
didn't
you
know
sure
what
you're
the
not a
hell.
sportsman?
It was very strange, and we kind of got the impression, all right, they're just messing with us.
Yeah.
They're just happy to have us, Americans. They're curious about us, so this is just their way to sort of play around with us, and they'll let us go eventually. But we didn't know when, and we didn't know if they were even allowed to let us go. Maybe they had to get approval from some higher command, and that's
Right.
actually what they told us. We were waiting, we're talking to the command, and we're trying to figure out what to do with you guys. And then at some point, they came in, and they had to go to prayer time. They had to go pray, and then our guides also went and prayed, but they prayed separately because they're Shiite. And then the Taliban came in, and they made us lunch. They brought in food, they brought in lunch, all these dishes, but they weren't eating. It was just for me and my buddy.
Okay.
And so we're like, okay, this is a little suspicious, but we have no choice. They're telling us to eat, we have to eat. And it wasn't very appetizing at all. It tasted awful. It was very stale bread, rotten tasting kind of yogurt, and I'm eating it, and I'm really nervous too, and my throat is parched, even though I was drinking water and stuff, but when you're that nervous,
Right.
you don't have an appetite.
Yeah.
And I'm trying not to gag, but they're telling me, like one guy who prepared all the food, and they're all gathered around, all the Taliban, and they're asking, and the guide is translating, he's asking, do you like the food? I'm like, oh, we love it, it's incredible. And he's like, well, how come your friend isn't eating it? And I'm like, John, eat the freaking food. And he starts eating it. And then he's like, how come it doesn't look like you like it because you're not eating enough of it? And then, so we start eating it faster. And he's like, I'm worried that maybe you think you are suspecting we poisoned you. He says that. And we're like, no, not at all. We don't think that at all.
And you're just thinking, yes.
And then at some point, like, they kind of felt mercy on us, and they just took the food away. And then they left us alone for another 30 minutes, and then they come back, and then one of the one of the lead intelligence guys sits down with us, and he's like, listen, don't tell any media that we detained you, please. And
All right.
and then I'm thinking, okay, that's a good sign that
Yeah.
they're going to let us go.
Okay.
And we're like, of course, we're not going to tell it.
Positive.
No one's ever going to know. We'll never mention
No one's ever
anything
gonna
to
know.
anyone. And then one guy's complaining. And again, this is all translated later on, like at the time, you know.
Right.
And then one of the Taliban complains is like, the foreigners always they always complain about being detained.
No,
It was-
no complaints about being detained were heard here.
So then they tell us, like, all right, we're going to let you go. And actually, we were given approval to let you go like hours ago, but we didn't want you to go hungry. We wanted you to have lunch.
That's nice of them.
And so they decide to, at that point, to let us go. And then the one guy who called me a sportsman, so they all line up, and they all want to shake our hands and say goodbye. And I so badly wanted to take photos with them because, these are the tough, grizzled-looking Taliban that most foreigners want to take a photo of.
Right.
But I didn't want to push my luck with the camera at that point. And I
Fair
could tell, I looked at my buddy, and he knew what I was thinking. He's like, no, don't do it. don't even ask. Let's get the hell out of here. So one by one, the Taliban all lined up, and they shook our hands, and they're all smiling, and one hand in our heart and one shaking, and then the one sportsman guy, when I shake his hand, he starts arm wrestling me, and he's got me up, and then I could tell, he's not letting go, and he's trying. I'm like, I'm not gonna beat him. I'm gonna let him win. Halfway through, I let him beat me, and he started laughing, and he was kind of it was weird. It's like these guys are almost likable in some way. It's like somehow we found common ground.
Right. They're just
And
goofing.
Yeah, it's like, at one point we're enemies, but now somehow we almost like each other. And that's kind of how we left each other. And we went to the gate, we got in our car, we drove to the gate. It's freaking locked. And my guide was like, oh no, maybe they're just messing with us again.
Right.
They were not allowed to leave.
This is the end game.
So then we have to go back and ask them to open the gate. And I was worried that they would tell us they can't, but no, someone ran over there and opened the gate.
Okay.
And we drove away and we get the heck out of there. And we thought about leaving Kandahar that night, driving all the way to Kabul, but that would have raised suspicion. So we went back to our hotel and we actually went and saw some more touristy things that day. But it was at that point, I mean, we spent half of the day being detained, and it was really hard to appreciate any, if you can call them tourist attractions. Right. But, we saw some really ancient places, and we met more Taliban, too. And we actually were able to take, they were lower level, younger guys, we were able to take pictures with them. And then after 2 nights in Kandahar, we then drove to Kabul on one of the most expensive roads ever built in the history of Earth. This is what I read, because of all the money that went into it. And then securing it is one of the most expensive, all paid for by U.S. tax dollars. And it was, all the bridges again were blown up. It was beautifully paved, except for the areas that were blown up by IEDs.
Right.
There were electrical infrastructure, but the wires were never laid because by then, it was already known that the Taliban were going to take over, and so the funding stopped. So all the villages are still without electricity, most of them on the way up to Kabul. We drove through some incredible places, incredible scenery, and again, we were too rushed, just too much to see, too far to drive. We drove through, there was one area where there was a dead man in the back of a truck, and the Taliban had a guy handcuffed, and they were throwing him down on the truck. Somebody had died, and there was a mob of people. I'm like, what's going on over there? And the driver, our guide is like, we don't want to know. Let's keep going. Just keep going. Yeah. Just keep driving. Let's get out of here. We drove through another village. We heard there was a wedding party. It was a Taliban wedding party, and there were gunshots. You could hear them. You could see the bullets flying up, the sparks. It was crazy. I mean, we went through some villages that were extremely impacted by the war, and there were lots of crippled people. I mean, it was sad. It was a lot of tragic scenery along the way. And then I rescued this, next slide. I rescued this guy. I saw him on the road. I love nature, and the only wildlife I think I saw in all of Afghanistan was this cool desert tortoise. And I said, stop the car. And I jumped out. I picked him up.
Because he was on the road, right?
He was on the road. He was on the road, and there was some traffic going by, and I picked him up and carried him over to a bush and released him into the bush.
That's nice.
That was
So I want 2 final questions before we open it up to the audience here. First of all, when you going back? When's the next trip planned for?
I'd love to go back. There's so much more to see in Afghanistan, so many more parts that I haven't been to. My wife probably doesn't want me to go back anytime soon.
But your daughter's down.
But my wife wants to go to Afghanistan. She really does.
Okay.
Yeah. So someday I will go. I'd love to take her there, and even my daughter, and I will. But it'd be nice if it stabilized a little bit before that happened.
Fair enough.
But I would love to go back and see it again. And I love the country, and there's a lot to see.
Sure. And then it sounds like sort of almost from the bottom to the top, like you just encountered such incredible hospitality from everyone there. So can you talk a little bit about that, and then we'll open it up to the audience?
Everybody's very friendly. I was detained, but even the Taliban, to some weird degree, were hospitable to us. And other friends of mine that had traveled there experienced the same. They would be detained by the Taliban, but as honored guests for multiple days, and fed very well and treated well. But it's just the Taliban just don't understand modern day tourism at all.
Yeah.
So, and I just love the people of Afghanistan. They're very welcoming and friendly, and it's an ancient custom of hospitality that is pretty unique and special in this world.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. And, I'd love to take some questions from the audience, if we have any. So, Rich will pass the mic around, and we'll hear from some folks.
So how do you know someone's Taliban as opposed to ordinary Afghani? And you also said your guide was Shia. Did that ever become a problem in a village that wasn't Shia?
So you don't know for sure. You don't know for sure who's Taliban and who isn't, but the Taliban almost always carry an AK-47 or some kind of a assault rifle. So that's usually how you know. And we didn't really have any issues with our guide because he was so street savvy. He was very well versed in how to interact with all the different villages, different walks of life in Afghanistan, the Pashtun people. And he spoke Pashto. He spoke multiple languages. So he didn't really have any issues, but that didn't mean that he's still Shiite and Hazara, and at the end of the day, people are going to think, in some areas, less of him for it. But we didn't have any issues because of that.
Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. One question that I've had, it seems that you had visited Afghanistan before. What would you say was the difference between technology in terms of cell phone? Because it sounds like you use quite a bit of your cell phone with photographs and reception. And did you see the same with the Afghan people as well? Has the technology with cell phone changed from the time you first went to what it is today?
The cell phone reception over there is better than here in the United States. It's incredible. Only in the most remote areas, like in Gore province and almost the entire drive through Helmand province had great reception. Yeah, it was incredible. So the technology has improved a lot from my previous visits. And most people have a cell phone. Taliban have a cell phone. They can look up internet. When you get visas now, they can research you. They can, even at checkpoints.
Got another question from over here. Yep.
Yeah, this is probably ridiculous, but one of your early slides showed a very strange-looking plane that must have been there for a reason, the slide, I mean, but that one.
Oh, yeah, okay,
What
yes.
is that? Explain it to me, because
I think I did a bad job of trying to explain the slides. Too busy answering the questions, and I wasn't following the slides. So that was a drone, and I just put that picture in there to explain that 2 weeks before my visit, a senior Al-Qaeda member that was one of the architects of 9/11 was blown up by a drone in Kabul. It was this guy right here, Zawa Hiwi. Yeah, so which almost put my trip at jeopardy because I didn't know how the Taliban were going to receive me now in light of this, especially as an American tourist, because they weren't behind the drone strike. They didn't know anything about it.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're there as a tourist and you're very observational. As an American, did you find yourself being judgmental in your head at any point in time about the Taliban regime?
Oh, yes, definitely, for sure. I'm very aware of how they treat women and how they've treated the Hazara, who constantly reminded us of the hardships they've experienced from the Taliban, and also right before we came, there were Shiite communities that were blown up by ISIS, but it wasn't long ago that the Taliban were doing the same thing. Just a year before that, they were sending in suicide bombers and blowing up Hazara all the time, and so I knew, they're trying to come off as being much better than ISIS, but they were doing the same things that ISIS were doing not very long ago. So yeah, I was constantly kind of battling with that. But, you know, as a tourist, my goal there was to be non-biased and to, one, survive, make it to the end of the trip. So by being judgmental, you can't do that. You just gotta be friendly with everybody. You just gotta go in there and find common ground, even with the Taliban.
During your time in Afghanistan, did you ponder very much over circumcision?
Okay.
What do you mean by that?
It doesn't know.
Well, Muslims are circumcised.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you asking me if I that?
Pondered about it.
And it never occurred to me.
Just say no. Okay.
But that never crossed my mind.
I'm just wondering what, in between all the sort of the highlights, what was day to day like in terms of like what did you eat? What was it like to get gas, get supplies? Where did you sleep? What were hotels like, et cetera?
Yeah, so weirdly enough, we in villages we'd stop at these like little shops. That's where we would get snacks, and they're usually stale cookies. Never like, or like chocolate bars that were stale, but never like Snickers or anything like that. But they always had Monster drinks. Yeah, and our driver, or some kind of form of some kind of energy drink, and our driver loved those things. So we'd always stock up on those, but we hardly ate in between the cities. Usually we would wait and eat until we got to a city, and then it'd be kebabs or Afghan food. I ate a lot of pizza. I love the pizza there. Pizza was incredible. So almost always I ordered pizza.
That's so funny.
Hi, can you speak a little bit to the different languages spoken? And did you or John try to learn any, any phrases or anything to get around?
Well, yeah, just a few of the basic phrases that, respectful greetings and things like that. But I mean, there are many different languages there, and I don't know the languages. I mean, how many languages are there in Afghanistan? Yeah, there's so many of them. It's a very diverse place.
Yeah.
And most people in Afghanistan, how many languages do you speak? Sorry to put you in the spot.
5.
See, yeah, 5 languages. That's pretty common. Most people speak 5 languages.
So there isn't like a lingua franca, even if you wanted to learn it, it wouldn't help you talk to enough people?
If you wanted to learn a language, that probably, I think, Pashtun would be a good one. Yeah, you could learn.
Pashtun, Persian.
Yeah, Persian. Some people that I know that have traveled through there that know Persian have been able to do it. Yeah, Persian. Probably enough people know a little bit of every language there, so if you knew any one language, you could get by.
Any more questions?
A couple more.
Is there any evidence of the warlord society in Afghanistan today?
Well, there's definitely warlords, but the Taliban have kind of become the new warlords, and so a lot of the opium fields now are run by Taliban-style warlords. I mean, that's once you acquire power and there's no control, there's no checks and balances, there's always going to be warlords, I think, especially when they all have guns.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. This has been incredibly interesting and informative. Thank you to everyone in our audience. And for the folks at home, if you like what you saw here tonight, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It helps us out a ton. And if you're in LA, why not come on by? We do this every single week. And you can ask your questions and meet our amazing speakers from our live audience. That's going to do it for us here at the Adventurers Club. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time off the beaten path. Good night.
We have a certificate of appreciation for you if you'll meet